Hello and welcome to our tutorial. We're here in Fusion and we're going to do some green screening, and then we're going to create some image sequences to bring into Blender to do sort of an interesting 3D composite. So I'm going to start by going to my loader, and I'm going to load in this clip here. Now this footage is 4K, so it's quite big. So first thing I'm going to do is hit fit so that it fits in the window. Now there's a few things we want to kind of run through here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a mask. Now there's lots of different types of mask in Fusion, and we will be coming back and doing quite a bit of work on masks, and we'll do some kind of motion graphics where we're doing sort of interesting sort of 2D kind of motion graphics, but we'll be doing that after Christmas. For now, the mask that we're going to use is to basically just cut out a very small area around the subject, this person here, and get rid of the rest of this green. So if we try to chroma key this here, which is like to remove the green is to chroma key it, this middle section would be straightforward enough, but because this is really bright and there are a couple of dark areas, this would actually be quite difficult. Now we would be helped by the fact that what we want to keep is very dark, so removing a bright area wouldn't really affect us over here too much, but normally this would be would cause a problem. So the type of mask that we're going to use is basically just an area selection. So I'm going to click on this button here, which says add polyline mask. So I'm going to click on that. I'm just very simply going to draw a very simple area. And you can see when I put my mouse here, I can complete the polygon. And I have drawn around here. So I'm going to just zoom out a tiny bit more. So it's at 18% now, so I'm going to do 15%. And that'll just let me extend this to the outer areas. So I can go in and I can select the points on the mask, and I can move them individually. Oops, and the mask will follow us, and it will do that. So each point on the mask has 2 additional points, and they're referred to as handles, and those handles allow you to kind of rotate around the mask and make the curved area basically control how steep the curve is. So we'll see an example of that in a moment. So when I move this one in, oops, too far. So I can use this handle here to rotate and kind of move out here so I don't cut off the shoulder area. And then again we'll use this outer handle here to increase the curve. Whoops. Okay, now our character in this example doesn't really move, and that is very helpful. So but this mask can be animated, and we'll have a look at that in a moment. So before we go any further, we're on frame 0, and this render, or this timeline here, is 1,000 frames long. So let's we're going to use only 4 seconds of this, so we're only going to use 150 frames. So I'm going to type 150 in here. Now the mask is selected, so we'll have a very quick look at the mask here. So we can soften the edges of the matte, or you can see here kind of blurs out, and in some instances, particularly when you're doing sort of animations, that can be very handy. It won't really help us here, it'll actually only make things harder. We can invert the mask, so that sometimes is very helpful to be able to select a small area and then get rid of everything else. We're not going to do that now. Most of these controls we're not interested in, but just to point out to you that by default down here animation is enabled. So if I moved my play marker anywhere in this timeline and then shifted a point, that point would then animate. So if this person moved, we could animate this mask with them over time. And then the other thing to know is this circle here in the middle of the mask is sort of our master control, that we can rotate the entire mask, so every single point. So if we wanted to move the mask in a particular direction, like all of the points simultaneously, we can control it from here. Now these controls are just they're similar to the controls that we would have generically over here, so rotation, etc. So but it's very handy to have a little kind of widget here that we can work with. So that's our first sort of step. Now the second step is to remove the green. So to do that, I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a matte. And if you've purchased the full version of this Unity Studio, you can use this one here, which is an ultra keyer, which is brilliant. But we don't have that in the college, so I'm going to delete it. And what we're going to use today is something not quite as effective, but it'll work. It's called a Primat. And I'm going to take the output from my video and plug it into the Primat. And then take the Primat and drag and drop it into this window here. Now we can see nothing, but that's because our image is so big, our actor is off screen. So again, I'm just going to hit fit. And now what we want to do is we want to remove the green. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit auto compute over here. So the Primat is selected and we have its properties. So it's done a really good job. And we're going to go in and zoom in a bit and see if we can improve it, but just at a glance it's done a great job. So let's move about in here and see what we've got. So it's even done a good job with sort of the wispy hair that we have, and over here it's done a good job too. We also have to check that the character has no sort of transparent areas, and it seems to be a good key. You can see slight kind of tinges of green here. The real test for this is when you start scrubbing through the timeline. So one frame could look well, but you would find another frame didn't look quite so well. So here it's not quite so well keyed on this frame as it was at the beginning. However, it's very good. Now let's go back to fit here so we can see everything. I'm going to put in a saver node now. I'm just going to say, where do I want to save? So I'm going to go to this green screen sequence here. I've already done this before, so I'm going to select this file here and I'm going to go save. Now this is a PNG file. You have to put in the .png. You have to put in the file extension. If you don't, it won't work. So I'll hit save, and yes, I'll record over that. Now if I were to save this now, I'd get a funny result. I would get my basically I would get what is in this window, which is not what we want. We want the rest of this image here not to be black and opaque. We want it to be transparent. So in order to do that, there's already sort of a Fusion's already anticipating us wanting to do that. So I'm just going to right click on this and go show tile picture. And you can see that there's multiple inputs here for different types of masks. So that says background, this one says garbage matte, etc. So I'm going to right click on the output from this mask and hold down the right mouse button and drag it over here and then let go. And when I let go, it'll give me a list of all the possible inputs. And I'm going to pick effect mask. And you can see now that all of the rest of the material over here is gone, and that's the result that we want. So we're basically using the mask twice. We're cutting out part of the video and then working on the inside of that mask, and then we're taking the mask and putting it over here and using that to tell us to ignore the rest of it. Now the last thing I want to do before we save this is just have a little chat about how we perceive this here. So I'm going to just point this little button out to you here, or this menu. So we can look at this image as a color image, and we can look at it in individual channels. We can look at it as red, green or blue, but importantly we can look at it as an alpha channel. So I'm just going to click on this for a second and we'll zoom in a little bit. So we can see here that I've got jet black, so it's a perfect key, and then we've got what is black here, but it's not as dark, so there's definitely I can see a line where the mask begins and this other dark area, and then we've got this white area. So what's white is opaque and what's black is completely transparent, and if we have a slightly off piece here that isn't jet black, then that means that this isn't 100% transparent. And there is a tool to help us with that. So I can go clean background noise because I have the primat selected, and I can just draw a line anywhere here, and I don't know if you can see there, it's got much darker. So again, I'll zoom back out and maybe pick a different area. So I'm going to look at this area here, and if you hold down the control key and use the middle mouse wheel, you can zoom in and out. I'm going to try this function again, so clean, and you can see now I've lost some of my kind of wispy hair, but I'll gladly sacrifice that for a better key. What I don't want is when I try to chroma key this to have little bits kind of sticking up and down. Okay, so normally when you do a keying, when you remove a color, there are bits that you have to go back in and fix, and we'll have one last look at this piece here. And again, we'll go to a different frame and see if this persists. Now I'm going to go back to color just to see if I can figure out what that is. So this is a crease in the green screen. So again, I'm going to go clean background and select that there, and this is kind of a good example. So I've told it to remove something very dark, and it has, but it has now made my actor disappear. So I'm going to undo that, and then the best way to get rid of this is actually to go back to the mask. And instead of trying to play with the keyer, I'm just going to bring the mask in closer, and I can rotate it a little bit so it's the same shape as the shoulder, and get rid of it that way. Now if the character was moving, that would be much harder. Now we still have a tiny little bit left, but we'll live with that for now. So that's just sort of a few kind of tips and guides and kind of the basic setup for how we set up our green screen. So now I'm going to hit to export this. I'm going to click on the saver. I'm going to double check that I have this as saved as a PNG file. So these are single files, single image files, and it's a PNG because a PNG will save this alpha channel, this alpha information. So I'm going to hit render and then start render. So I'm going to leave the default settings here for the export, and then we'll see it render through each frame. So these frames are quite big. So I'm going to try and open one here so it's on frame 5. So I'm going to open frame 1. So this is frame 1 here, and we can see it's far from perfect. So we've got kind of green residue in the hair, and we've also got a slightly kind of broken area on this side. So while it looks good, it's still, as I said, far from perfect. Now we probably won't put all of the character in the shot, so we'll probably kind of cut down here with the frame in our 3D app. But I'm going to pause for now, and then I'm going to come back and do the second green screen clip, and then we'll pop into Blender. So I'm just going to pause the recording while this renders out. Okay, so that took 10 minutes to render out, so I'm glad I paused it. This is sort of to give you a look at what comes out the other end. So this is an image sequence. So each one of these is a PNG file, and it's 150 frames long, so we have 150 of them, and that's what we'll be importing into Blender, and we'll get back to that in a little while. So we want to do the other shot now, so I'm going to put in a loader, and this time we want to bring in, so not this shot, which is interesting. I was going through this shot, and maybe we'll look at it in class. So what we have here is when he hops around on one foot, his arm moves out and goes in front of the lamp, which would mean we'd have to do this masking around his arm, which would make it too hard. Well, too hard for the first time we do it anyway. Whereas this wonderful actor here stays completely still. So this is what we're going to use. So I'm going to open this one, and I'm going to take this piece of video and drop it up here. And again, we will hit fit, and we're going to only use the first 150 frames. So yeah, so that's all good. What we can do here is, we can plug stuff out or build it all again. So I'm just going to basically build it all again. So if I were doing this myself, I would not start from 0, but just so you get to go through the process again. So again, we have the same sort of issues here. The green this lamp is too close to the green screen, and to fix that, all we need to do is move it back maybe half a meter. So there's too great a variety of shades of green. So and then compared to the background, the ground area is too dark. So we have a whole range of issues with the green screen, which will make this key quite difficult. But we'll do our best. So again, we're going to go back to, so our video is selected. We're going to make a polyline mask. So again, we'll just try and do a very simple outline of roughly where we think we need to key, and then we will bring it in as close as we can. And again, I'm more interested in sort of methodology than making it perfect in this particular example. And this is a difficult key because of this light here. Now, I've done this already, so I know it's a tricky one to do. He moves his elbow as we play through the video, and it would nearly be worth our while to actually end the clip there at frame 111, because it's that bit that gives us all the trouble. But we'll do our best with it. So if we're making this for the very last frame, we would fit it in just like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just animate this mask a little bit. I'm going to position everything else because I'm going to oops, let me do that. I'm going to animate it, so make sure everything else is in the correct position before I go, because I don't want anything moving unexpectedly. Okay. Okay, so this is how it looks on frame 150. And most of the work we're going to do is going to be around this, like 40 frames. So I'm going to go to frame 140. And he has moved his elbow out. So without me doing anything, I should be able to just take this and move it out. Okay. And I'm not going to do any more work. I'm just going to bring it back, and you can see I've got a frame 125. there's a green vertical line here and a green vertical line here, and that's it recording the change in shape. So we don't at any point have to tell it to animate, it knows automatically to animate. So I need to speed this up just fractionally here. Oops. There we go. Bring that out. Bring that out. Okay. And so I'm literally going to go through this frame by frame. Because we don't have that many frames. Okay. And we can bring this in a tiny bit closer now. Oops. And to there. Okay. So now I'm going to do the keying, and you'll see where the bright areas are pose a problem, and equally so does this area here, and that's because there's a lot of areas of similar sort of luminance, similar brightness in the trousers. So as before, let's add a tool. Let's add a matte and a primat. Oh, I think I didn't click on that properly. So a primat, there it is there. And we need to plug in the video into the primat, and then take the primat and put it up into this window. And then we're going to hit auto compute. And at some point it will work. Why is that not working? Let's try that again. We'll load it in, and so we should be able to just hit auto compute, and it will. There we go. Okay, this is my computer taking its own sweet time. So as we look, let's just zoom in a bit and have a look at the various problems we have. So we've got transparency issue in the shoulder and in the jacket. We've got his whole, he looks green, and we've got too much green at the bottom. So a whole bunch of issues. So let's see what we can do to fix this. So in the same way that we can, it says select background color or clean background noise, where we can take out background, we can also clean foreground noise. So I can say add this back in. So click clean foreground noise and draw a line here, and you can see this is I can go clean background noise and take some of this out, and hopefully, but I still have a minor transparency issue here. I've got some noise here I don't want, and I definitely have problems around here. So if I go clean background noise and I remove that, which I can do, then the legs start to disappear. So unfortunately some of this is going to be a bit of a compromise, and the real solution to this is either to mask the character entirely, like really tightly, and animate it frame by frame, and that will give you a decent solution, or you can shoot it again. But like I said, in this example here, we are literally we want to just look at methodology. So I'm going to repeat what I did before, which is I'm going to take the output from here, right click on it, drag it on top of the primat, and then let go and pick effect mask, and that will remove everything else. And then as before, we collect a saver, and this saver is going to go into this one here, and I'm going to record over that, and that is not where I want my saver. So let's fix that. I don't know why I did that. Probably because I had the wrong thing selected. Okay, so this should come out of there and in here. This needs to go in there, and then this needs to go back over here. Okay, and you can even at a glance you can see how poor the key is around his upper body. Yes, it's not good. If we check on our alpha channel here, you can see it's not good. It's so bad I have to go back and do a little bit more to clean it up a tiny bit. Okay, that is marginally better. No, I think I could stay doing this for a long time and not win. Okay, so I'll click on my background, and it's called background.00png. So it's the same thing here. I'm going to export a PNG image sequence. Now the last one took 10 minutes to export. I assume this is going to take the same, so I'm going to pause the recording here and then wait till it finishes the render. Okay, so that took less time. That was 4.5 minutes to render, and we have the same set of image sequences. So I was going to save this. Where will we save it? We'll put it into our green screen folder, and we'll call it GS Mars. So green screen Mars. Now I'm just saving the composition here, so this is not an export or anything. So I'm going to close that and jump into Blender. Now I'll be giving you in class this file so that you can add things into it. So let's just look through the camera and have a quick render, and this is what it looks like. So it's not terribly exciting. It's we've got a depth of field and a bit of a landscape, and we've put our rocks on and kind of distributed them over the ground. So like I said, we did that in class. So I'm going to go back to solid mode here for a while and work our way through this. So this hopefully takes about 10 minutes to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a plane, and I'm going to call this shoulder, and this is going to be where we put that piece of video. So I'm going to hang on so you can see what I'm doing. Turn on the keys. So I'm looking from right orthographic, so I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees, and I'm going to hit G and move this up close to the camera, hit 7, and then as you can see here it's not quite in front of the camera, so I'm going to go G and place that about there. And now I'm going to go scale on Z, so it's big. Actually, I don't need to do that, I can just move it. So G, so it's kind of larger than the camera, and then scale on X, so it's kind of widescreen. So that's our that's the shot that we're going to use at the start. That's going to have the shoulder in it of our actor. So before we start doing texturing, etc., I just want to show you how to. There's a problem with kind of green screening this way. If the camera is going to move, which it is, so the camera is going to move forward, there is the possibility that the camera, if it rotates at all, will reveal that the video is in fact only two-dimensional, and obviously that breaks the illusion of having our character integrate with the scene. So to fix that, or to try and fix that, to kind of cheat it, we're going to go to constraints, and I'm going to add a locked track constraint. and I'm going to lock it to the camera and set it to Z and Y. And you can see there's now a dotted line between the camera and this plane. Now I'm going to select the camera, and I just want you to see what happens when I move the camera. So it's going to rotate with to basically be facing the camera, be perpendicular to the camera all the time, so that we can't I can't move the camera around this plane and see behind it. It will always look somewhat flat to the camera, and that's exactly what we want. Otherwise we'll be able to sort of look around the corner and see that it's completely flat. Now it doesn't work 100%, but it's called billboarding, and but it's a handy little trick. So we'll be doing that on this plane here, and then we'll be putting our character up sort of on top of a hill and doing the same with the character. So just to reiterate, so we're not in modifiers, which we've used lots of times before, but in constraints, and we've used a constraint called locked track and selected Z and Y. Okay, so let's unwrap this. So I'm just going to go into edit mode and then press U and unwrap, and that should give us just a very simple square in the UV image editor. If I get rid of the render result, and then here I'm going to hit open, and I'm going to bring in this. Now I'm only going to bring in one image, but down here it says detect sequences. So Blender is going to detect that this is an image sequence, and it will know to load all of these images in frame by frame. So I'm going to hit open, and then in we pop, and we can see the checkered pattern for transparency, and there's our character. Now what we need to do is set up a material on this plane so that it's visible through the camera the way we want it to be. So let's close this window for a moment and set up this material in the node editor. So I'm going to hit new material. Might as well go into object mode, although it'll work in edit mode as well. And in this setup here, what I want to do is I want to tell Blender to recognize the alpha channel, the transparency in this image. So as before, I'm going to delete my diffuse shader. I'm going to add in my principal shader, which gives us much more control. I'm going to add in my image texture. Okay, and the image we're going to bring in is this foreground image, and we're going to link the two of these together. And we might as well just, so this will basically give us the image without any transparency, and I'll go into rendered mode and you'll see a big black square. Yeah. So the first thing I want to do before I start setting this up correctly is I want to remove all of the so how metallic and spectacular, or specular the not spectacular the shader is. So I want to make this as neutral as possible, and then what we've got to do is we've got to combine this shader with a transparency shader. So this is going to see the alpha channel, and what we're going to do is we're going to use a mix shader. So I'm going to mix the two of these together, and then we need to tell Blender how to, or what parts of the image to keep and what parts of the image to get rid of, and that information is contained within the image itself. So it has here an alpha output, so I'm going to plug that in here, and this, you can see we have exactly the opposite of what we want. So, and that's because I've got these in the wrong order. So this should go into the top, and this, whoops, should go into the bottom. And then we have the image that we want. Okay, Now we'll look through our camera, and what we can see is two things. One is it's completely out of focus, and that's because the depth of field is set very high, and we can't see anything on the image, so we might need to add in a light. So we'll go back into solid mode and see what we've got. So there is a light here, but it's the wrong side of the image. So I'm just going to bring that over here. And we go back to rendered mode, and that enables us to see the detail in the image. We can see the pattern in the top and the texture of the hair, so that's fine. Now we probably want to make that lamp slightly red so that everything is mixing into the view. And let's see, we look through the camera again, and then we want to change. I'm going to select the camera, and I'm going to go to the camera's depth of field, and I'm going to reduce the depth of field as I increase it, so the other way. Okay, and we do want the depth of field, but just a very, very small one. Maybe a little bit more than that, so that's not too bad. Okay, and we can always fix the depth of field later on, but we do want to see some detail. We don't want this just a complete blur. Now, I'm just going to save this, because we are dealing with really big files in these 4K images, so we could fall out of memory. So I'm going to take this image, or this image plane, and I'm going to duplicate it. Actually, yeah, and we've called it shoulder, so I'm going to duplicate it. Go Shift D and move it up here, and it has all of the properties that, because it's a duplicate, that the previous one had. So as I move it around, you can see that it will always point towards the camera, so that's very handy. And we're going to call this head to toe, because it's a full body shot. And let's see, we'll place this on top of our hill, or that's closest to the camera. So I'm going to hit G and then place this here. Now this, the character in this, the actor in this, isn't actually their feet don't touch the bottom of the image, so they're probably going to float in space now when we go into rendered mode. But we can just oops, let's zoom out. Oh, okay, so let's I'm jumping very far ahead of myself here. So first things first, I haven't loaded the image in. So this material that we've made, well, let's call this shoulder, and then we need to make a new one. So I'm going to hit plus, and we'll call this again head to toe, just so we know what we're talking about. And that head to toe needs a different image sequence. So it needs this one here, the background one, and I'm going to hit open. Okay, now let's go to rendered view and see what we get. So there is so this is selected, so I'm going to hit G and Z in a second. So G and Z, and slowly move down till I'm touching the ground. So GZ, and there we have our feet on the ground. Now we can do all sorts of or we should do all sorts of good things here. We should duplicate this plane and make it darken it and make it into a shadow, etc. But for now we're just going to try and keep it simple, and there is nothing stopping us from, and we discussed this in class, from going Shift D and adding this in multiple times. So again, let's see if it touches the ground correctly. Z. Oh. About there. Now, scale is really important in this, so we need to determine how big he should be relative to the distance in our plane. So let's just have a little think about that. If we think about the size of these rocks, he is probably too small. So I'm going to go S4. And obviously that's going to then put him in the middle of the ground, so we'll lift him up a bit. Go back to rendered mode and then see if we can align his feet on the ground a little better. So let's say that there. Again, I'm just doing it by eye. And there he is standing in the distance. And our sun is shining in what direction? In that direction. So let's see if we can cast a shadow off the plane itself. So go back to rendered mode. And we can actually get that light to, so if we can up it just to, as an illustration, I'll put it to 200. And we'll rotate it downwards and see if we can get a shadow. And if we can't, we can always duplicate the plane and add in a shadow, like a fake shadow. But you can see here, so from my character, the light as it shines through the plane can see the alpha channel, and it's casting a shadow not from the plane that the character is on, but based on the opaque parts of the image. So we can get sort of a realistic shadow, and then as the character moves, this shadow is based on the opaque elements in the image, so therefore the shadow will animate as well. So we get so that's very, very cool. Okay, so again, I'm going to pause this because we're 40 minutes in, and I'm going to render this out, and then this is going to take probably 30-40 minutes to render out, and I may do one or two little tweaks before I do that, and then I'll hopefully show you a finished product. So file save before I do any rendering, and then I'm going to go to my output settings. So I have it set to be Mars 2, and I'm going to output an AVI, so a video file, not an image sequence, at full HD. I might actually, just for time, set that to be 50%, so it'll actually be half those two numbers, so it'll be quarter of a HD frame. But like I said, this is just for illustration purposes. And I have previously in the last tutorial I had animated the camera, so we're going to actually end up, our end frame will be there, which is perfect. Well, when I say perfect, his feet are actually in the ground, so it's not perfect, but it's not bad. And so we'll see what that looks like as in a final render in a minute. Okay, so this is our result. Not perfect, and you can see there's a part of the image plane is visible from the alpha channel in the start of the render, and then it sort of turns itself off. We can fix all that, but you get the idea of what's possible. Obviously the camera movement is too dramatic. There's all sorts of things wrong with this shot, not least that he is partly transparent. But you can see he's animated, etc. And just on that note, because this tutorial is quite long, so I won't go on any further, but there's just one small omission here in Blender that I didn't tell you. By default this says single image here, and obviously we want an image sequence, so you need to tell it that you want to use an image sequence, and then you need to tell it what the range of frames is, and we're using 1 to 100, so I put in frames 100 before I rendered this out. So yeah, that'll give you an idea of the yeah, what we're trying to do, and what, you know, different kind of methodologies available to you, and we'll be building on this over the next couple of weeks.